History of pirates.
When we think about pirates, we usually imagine ruthless criminals attacking ships for gold and treasure. But what if piracy was never just about robbery? What if many of the men labeled as pirates were actually caught in a much larger struggle involving empires, maritime trade, political power, colonial expansion, commercial monopolies, and control of the seas? From the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean, from the Caribbean to China, governments repeatedly declared certain groups to be pirates. Yet the question remains, who had the authority to make that judgment? The history of piracy is not simply a story of crime. It is also a story of power, empire, maritime law, global trade routes, and political control. In this video, we will explore how the rise of the great European merchant empires transformed the oceans, how governments used the label of piracy to defend their interests, and why the conflict between pirates and states reveals one of the most important struggles of the early modern world. There is a description of piracy that appears throughout history. Piracy can be understood as illegal armed aggression carried out in important maritime trade routes where political control is weak. Typically, these attacks are conducted by marginalized groups seeking wealth from richer targets, or by newcomers attempting to force their way into already established commercial networks. At first glance, this definition seems straightforward. It tells us about plunder, violence, and illegality. It explains immediate motives and economic rewards. But it leaves out a crucial question. When someone is called a pirate, what law is being violated? And behind that law, what political power is enforcing it? These questions become especially important during the rise of the great merchant empires between the 15th and 19th centuries. Throughout different seas and different centuries, piracy often looked remarkably similar. Whether along the Barbary coast, near the Rio de la Plata, around Madagascar, or off the coast of Fujian in China, similar patterns appeared again and again. Pirates tended to establish bases in sheltered bays, isolated islands, and coastal hideouts located close to heavily traveled shipping routes. Their communities often developed distinctive social characteristics. Contemporary observers frequently described exaggerated behavior, unusual clothing, and eccentric lifestyles within these largely male societies. Their methods were also familiar. They raided coastal settlements, intercepted merchant vessels, cooperated with local populations when useful, and sometimes imposed tyranny over them when it served their interests. Despite differences in geography and culture, piracy repeatedly followed recognizable patterns across the world. Just as piracy showed recurring characteristics, so did the responses of governments. Authorities across different regions often used similar language when describing anti-piracy campaigns. They spoke of the need to clean the sea. After military campaigns, governments frequently offered pardons to former pirates. This pattern appeared in very different contexts. In the 16th century, the Netherlands struggled with Norman and Scottish pirates attacking North Sea fishing fleets. Centuries later, the Qing dynasty confronted massive pirate confederations numbering thousands of members along China's southern coast. Although separated by time and geography, both governments employed remarkably similar strategies. These similarities have long attracted the attention of historians. Most studies have focused on the economic damage piracy caused to commerce and on the practical methods used to suppress it. However, another question deserves equal attention. What was the political meaning of piracy? And what did anti-piracy campaigns reveal about the growth of state power? To understand piracy during the age of European overseas expansion, we must first understand the political choices that shaped global commerce. States constantly faced decisions regarding the control of oceans and trade routes. Some sought monopolies, others promoted open access. The Iberian powers, particularly Spain and Portugal, attempted to establish exclusive control over vast maritime routes. Later, England and France would pursue similar ambitions. The Dutch, by contrast, generally favored maintaining commercial routes that remained open and accessible. Governments also faced another challenge. Should they suppress Europeans who challenged official control? Or should they eliminate competing non-European trading networks? These decisions were not merely economic. They represented expressions of state power. The political decisions that created merchant empires also created the conditions that produced piracy. A common assumption claims that piracy appears wherever trade flourishes. This idea contains part of the truth. Active commerce is certainly necessary for piracy. Without valuable cargoes and busy shipping lanes, piracy cannot thrive. But commerce alone is not enough. The history of piracy demonstrates that major outbreaks usually emerged when political circumstances change. Sometimes a state attempted to impose authority over regions where it previously possessed little influence. At other times, newly emerging commercial powers challenged established ones. In every case, the rewards of piracy were economic. Yet the forces that generated piracy were fundamentally political. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment and share this video. Most studies of piracy have approached the subject from a legal perspective. Historians often examine the laws used against pirates and evaluate their actions according to those legal standards. But this approach leaves an important question unanswered. Who created those laws, and what authority stood behind them? By focusing solely on legal definitions, scholars sometimes overlook the power struggles hidden beneath them. The problem becomes even more complicated because there has never been a universally accepted definition of piracy in international law. The concept has always contained ambiguities. What one government considered piracy, another might view as legitimate commerce, private warfare, or resistance. As a result, the label pirate often reflected political interests as much as legal principles. Understanding piracy therefore requires examining not only laws, but also the powers that created and enforced them. The first major episode of imperial piracy emerged between 1520 and 1650. During this period, the Iberian powers declared other Western Europeans to be pirates in regions where Spain and Portugal had already claimed imperial authority. This conflict was especially visible along the Atlantic routes connecting Europe and the Americas. Unlike some regions where European merchants displaced existing trading systems, the Americas presented a different situation. The Iberians initially dominated commerce there. However, they soon faced competition from merchants belonging to other European nations. French traders, followed later by English traders, organized commercial voyages across the Atlantic despite Spanish restrictions. To Spanish authorities, these outsiders were pirates. Yet many of these so-called pirates were essentially adventurers challenging Spanish commercial monopolies. The Greek origins of the word pirate itself suggest wandering adventurers moving across the seas. Denied permission to trade beyond the Canary Islands, they sought opportunities elsewhere. Their importance extends beyond piracy alone. These maritime challengers played a significant role in expanding and intensifying European commercial activity beyond Iberian control. In doing so, they helped reshape the economic geography of the Atlantic world. The second major episode involved territorial merchant empires that excluded foreigners from their commercial systems. This period can be divided into two separate phases. Between 1660 and 1720, France and England consolidated their own colonial and commercial power. As they did so, they increasingly prohibited the activities of cosmopolitan groups of privateers and maritime adventurers. These groups had previously operated across political boundaries. At the same time, the French and English challenged the Dutch commercial system, which relied heavily on free trade and networks of trading posts throughout the Atlantic world. An important transformation occurred. French and English admiralty courts began prosecuting their own nationals as pirates. This development revealed something significant. The suppression of piracy within national structures demonstrated the growing power of the state. The policies used against pirates, including punishment, forgiveness, regulation, and selective tolerance, revealed the practical limits of governmental authority. By observing how states dealt with pirates, we can measure how effectively those states were able to impose their power. A new wave of piracy emerged between 1714 and 1750. This time, pirates challenged commercial systems that had already become established. The case centered on smugglers resisting Spanish attempts to restore control over important trade routes and commercial networks. This episode highlights an important distinction. Historians have often struggled to separate smuggling from piracy. According to the argument presented here, the transformation from one into the other occurred when governments attempted to impose tighter control over trade routes. A weak or tolerant state might accept smuggling, but once that state sought stronger control, resistance could transform smugglers into pirates. The key factor was not simply the activity itself. It was the relationship between that activity and state power. This wave of piracy therefore reflected the strengths and weaknesses of merchant empires attempting to regulate large-scale commerce. A third form of piracy emerged from encounters between Europeans and non-Europeans after 1500. These conflicts became particularly important in the Indian Ocean. European newcomers entered regions where long-established indigenous trading networks already existed. When Europeans attempted to impose restrictions and monopolies, resistance often followed. The Portuguese provide a clear example. In the 16th century, they sought to establish a monopoly over the Indian pepper trade. To achieve this objective, they treated the people of Malabar as pirates. This example demonstrates how the label of piracy could be used against established commercial communities that resisted foreign attempts at control. Once again, piracy was closely connected to struggles over trade, authority, and imperial expansion. The conflict was not simply between law and crime. It was also a contest between competing visions of who had the right to regulate commerce. The story of piracy between 1450 and 1850 is far more complex than a tale of criminals attacking merchant ships. Across the Atlantic, the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, and countless other seas, piracy emerged wherever political power and commercial ambition collided. Merchant empires created laws, they claimed trade routes, they established monopolies, and they labeled those who challenged their authority as pirates. The economic rewards of piracy were real, but the forces that produced piracy were overwhelmingly political. Whether confronting French adventurers in the Atlantic, suppressing smugglers in the Caribbean, prosecuting their own subjects, or battling indigenous traders in the Indian Ocean, governments were ultimately fighting for control over commerce itself. The history of piracy is therefore not merely the history of thieves at sea. It is the history of empires competing for power, authority, and dominance over the world's oceans. And in that struggle, the pirate and the emperor were often far more closely connected than they appeared.